Things had begun to stabilise after the return of Prince Viserys from his captivity in Lys, and the new additions to the royal family in House Roger of Lys took their place in the running of the realm. There was even cause for joy, with the birth of Viserys and Lara Roger's firstborn son, a boy they called Aegon, after the king, but things were about to become challenging for House Targaryen. The first omen of the dark times to come was seen on Driftmark, when the dragon's egg presented to Laena Velaryon upon her birth quickened and hatched. Her parents' pride and pleasure quickly turned to ash. The dragon that wriggled from the egg was a monstrosity, a wingless worm, maggot-white and blind. Within moments of hatching, the creature turned upon the babe in her cradle and tore a bloody chunk from her arm. As Laena shrieked, Lord Oakenfist ripped the dragon off her, flung it to the floor, and hacked it to pieces. The news of this monstrosity dragon birth and its bloody aftermath were greatly troubling to King Aegon, and soon led to angry words between his grace and his brother. Prince Viserys still had his own dragon's egg, though it had never hatched. The prince had kept it with him throughout his years in exile and captivity, but it held great meaning for him. When Aegon commanded that no dragon's eggs were allowed in the castle, Viserys grew most wroth. Yet the king's will prevailed, as it must. The egg was sent to Dragonstone, and Prince Viserys refused to speak to King Aegon for a month. His grace was much dismayed by the quarrel with his brother, Mushroom tells us, but what happened next left him bereft and devastated. King Aegon was enjoying a quiet supper in his solar with his little queen Daenerys and his friend, Gaemon Powerhair, and as the dwarf was entertaining them with a silly song about a drunk bear that drank too much, when the bastard boy, Gaemon, began to complain of cramping in his gut. "Run, fetch Grand Maester Munkin," the king commanded Mushroom. By the time the fool returned with the Grand Maester, Gaemon had collapsed, and Queen Daenerys was too, moaning, "My belly hurts." Gaemon had long served as King Aegon's food taster, as well as his cupbearer, and Munkin soon declared that both he and the little queen were the victims of poisoning. The Grand Maester gave Daenerys a powerful purgative, which most likely saved her life. She retched uncontrollably throughout the night, wailing and withering in pain, and was too drained and weak to leave her bed the next day, but she was cleansed. Munkin came too late for Gaemon Powerhair, however. The boy died within the hour. Born a bastard in a brothel, he had reigned briefly over his kingdom on a hill during the Moon of Madness, saw his mother put to death, and served as King Aegon III's cupbearer, whipping boy, and friend. He was thought to be but 9 years old at his death. Afterwards, Grand Maester Munkin fed what remained of the supper to a cage of rats, and determined that the poison had been baked into the crust of an apple tart. Fortunately, the king had never been especially fond of sweets, nor any other food if truth be told. The knights of the Kingsguard at once descended to the Red Keep's kitchens, and took dozens of cooks, bakers, scullions, and serving girls into custody, delivering them to George Graceford, the Lord Confessor. Under torture, 7 confessed to attempting to poison the king, but each account was markedly different from the next. There was no agreement or consensus on where they had got the poison, and none of the captives correctly named the dish that had been poisoned. So Lord Rowan reluctantly dismissed their confessions as not fit to wipe his arse with. The hand was in a black state even before the poisoning, for he'd only recently suffered his own personal tragedy when his young wife, the Lady Floris, died in childbirth. Though the king had spent less time with his cupbearer after the return of his brother to Westeros, Gaemon Powerhair's death nonetheless left Aegon inconsolable. One small good came from it, for it helped him heal the rift between the king and his brother, Viserys, who broke his stubborn silence to comfort his grace in his grief, and sat with him by the queen's bedside. That proved little enough, however. Thereafter, it was Aegon who was silent, for his old gloom had settled over him once again, and he seemed to lose all interest in his court and his kingdom. The next blow fell far from King's Landing, in the Vale of Arryn, when Sir Corwin Corbray ruled that Lady James Arryn's will must prevail, and declared Sir Joffrey Arryn the rightful lord of the Eyrie. When the other claimant refused to back down and to accept his ruling, Sir Corwin imprisoned the Gilded Falcon and his sons, and executed Eldrick Arryn. Yet somehow Eldrick's mad father, Sir Arnold, eluded him and fled to Runestone, where he had served as a squire in his boyhood. Gunther Royce, known in the Vale as the Bronze Giant, was an old man as stubborn as he was fearless. When Sir Corwin arrived to wrinkle Sir Arnold out of his sanctuary, Lord Gunther donned his ancient bronze armour and rode out to confront him. Words quickly grew heated, turned to curses, then threats. When Lord Corbray drew Lady Forlon, his Valyrian steel sword, whether to strike at Royce or merely threaten him, it's not known, but a crossbowman on the Runestone battlements loosed a quarrel that pierced him through the breast. Striking down one of the king's regents was an act of treason, akin to attacking the king himself. Moreover, Sir Corwin had been the uncle to Quentyn Corbray, the powerful and martial lord of Heartsholme, as well as the beloved husband of Rhaena Targaryen, the Dragon Rider, twin to Lady Baelor, and thus by marriage he was kin to Alan Oakenfist. With his death, the flames of war sprung up anew across the Vale of Arryn. The Corbrays, the Hunters, the Cranes, the Redfords, all rallied in support of Lady Jane's chosen heir, Sir Joffrey Arryn, whilst the Royces of Runestone and Sir Arnold the Man there were joined by the Templetons, Tollets, Coldwaters and Duntons, along with lords of the Fingers and the Three Sisters. Goldtown and House Grafton remained staunch in its support of the Gilded Falcon, despite his captivity, but ultimately with the deaths of Sir Corwin, all the eyes of the realm had turned to the Vale, and things would only get more bloody before they got any better.